The Matariki Observatory sat perched on the edge of civilization, its silver dome gleaming under the New Zealand night sky. Dr. Eliza Morgan hunched over her computer, analyzing data from the new deep space telescope she'd fought 3 years to fund. Her colleagues had long since departed, leaving her alone with the stars, just as she preferred. "Come on, show me something interesting," she muttered, rubbing tired eyes. At 36, Eliza had dedicated her life to astronomy, sacrificing relationships and family for the pursuit of cosmic discovery. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, silver strands beginning to appear at her temples despite her relatively young age. The monitor flickered, data streams scrolling past as the telescope scanned a previously unexplored sector near the Pleiades cluster. A sudden spike in the readings made her sit upright. What the hell? Eliza adjusted the parameters, focusing the telescope on the anomaly. A strange light, unlike any stellar body she'd documented before, pulsed at the edge of the cluster. It wasn't a supernova or a quasar. This light seemed to be moving with purpose, its trajectory altering in ways that defied natural phenomena. She worked feverishly, recording measurements and capturing images as the light grew steadily brighter. According to her calculations, it was approaching at impossible speeds. Heart racing, she wondered if she should alert someone, the observatory director, perhaps, or even the government. But before she could reach for her phone, the room filled with a soft, bluish glow. Eliza spun around, breath catching in her throat. A sphere of light hovered in the center of the observatory, pulsing gently. It expanded, brightening until she had to shield her eyes. When the light receded, a figure stood where the sphere had been. Eliza froze, unable to process what she was seeing. Before her stood a woman, or something that resembled a woman. Her skin had an opalescent quality, shifting between pale blue and lavender. Her hair, if it could be called that, floated around her head like liquid silver, moving as though underwater. Most striking were her eyes, large, almond-shaped, and completely black except for pinpoints of light that resembled stars. "Gar." Eliza Morgan, the being said, her voice musical and layered, as though multiple people spoke in perfect harmony. "I am Lyra. I have traveled far to find you." Eliza backed away until she hit the edge of her desk. "What, who are you? How do you know my name?" Lyra took a step forward, then winced, her form momentarily flickering. "Your atmosphere is difficult for me. I don't have much time." She steadied herself, the starlight in her eyes dimming slightly. "I am from a world you would call Seleno, the 7th planet orbiting the star you named Atlas, in the Pleiades cluster." "That's impossible," Eliza whispered. "The Pleiades are over 400 light-years away. Distance is different for my kind." Lyra's form flickered again, more violently this time. "My world is dying. Our star has begun to collapse, and we have scattered across the universe, seeking compatible beings with whom we can form bonds." Bonds? Eliza found herself oddly calm despite the impossibility of the situation. Perhaps shock had overridden her panic response. "A symbiotic connection," Lyra explained, her voice weakening. "Our essence, what you might call a soul, can only survive by forming a harmonic resonance with another sentient being. We have searched countless worlds, analyzing patterns and frequencies." She looked at Eliza with those star-filled eyes. "Your frequency matches mine perfectly." Eliza's scientific mind raced to make sense of this. "You're saying you selected me? Out of all humans?" "Yes." Lyra moved closer, her movements graceful despite her obvious discomfort. "Our scientists studied your transmissions, your culture, your biology. We identified potential matches based on quantum resonance patterns. You were my match. And this bond. What exactly does it entail?" Eliza asked, finding herself oddly drawn to the alien being despite her reservations. "A union of energies. Not unlike your concept of marriage," but deeper. Our essences would intertwine, allowing me to exist within your atmosphere. Lyra's form flickered again, longer this time. When she solidified, she seemed paler, the lights in her eyes dimmer. Without the bond, I will fade within days. My physical form cannot maintain cohesion in your world. Eliza struggled to comprehend. You're asking me to marry you? An alien I just met? Lyra's expression shifted to something like sadness. I understand your hesitation. It is much to ask. But I have no choice, my world is gone, and I cannot return. The bond would benefit you as well. My knowledge, my abilities, would become accessible to you. We would share a connection deeper than any human relationship. And if I refuse? Then I will die, Lyra said simply. My essence will disperse, and everything my civilization was, our history, our knowledge, our art, everything I carry within me will be lost forever. The weight of that responsibility settled on Eliza's shoulders. She'd dedicated her life to understanding the cosmos, and now the cosmos had delivered this impossible choice to her doorstep. I need time, Eliza said. This is overwhelming. Time is something I have little of, Lyra replied, her form becoming translucent for a moment before solidifying again. But I understand. I will stay as long as I can. 1,000 questions flooded Eliza's mind. Can you prove what you're saying? About your world, about this bond? Lyra nodded. She raised her hand, and the air between them shimmered. Suddenly, Eliza saw images, a magnificent world with crystal spires and oceans that glowed from within, strange beings moving through structures of impossible architecture, and finally, a star turning blood red, its surface roiling with massive flares as the beings fled in vessels of light. My home, Lyra said softly. And its end. The images faded, leaving Eliza breathless. I need to think. And I should probably get you somewhere safer than this observatory. Someone could walk in. As you wish, Lyra said, attempting to take another step but stumbling instead. Her form flickered violently. Without thinking, Eliza rushed forward to catch her. As her hands touched Lyra's arms, she felt a strange tingling sensation, as though gentle electricity flowed between them. Lyra stabilized, her form becoming more solid at Eliza's touch. The resonance, Lyra whispered, looking up at Eliza with wonder. Even without the bond, our frequencies align. This is why I chose you. Eliza helped Lyra to a chair, noticing how the alien skin felt like cool silk beneath her fingers. As a scientist, she should be documenting everything, running tests, alerting the scientific community to this unprecedented contact. But something deeper, more instinctive, told her to protect Lyra, from the world, from others who might not understand. Come home with me, Eliza said, surprising herself with the decision. We'll figure this out together. As the first light of dawn crept into the observatory, Eliza Morgan helped a being from another world into her car, knowing that her life, and potentially the course of human history, had just irrevocably changed. Professor Daniel Jackson hunched over his microscope in the university's biochemistry lab, his salt and pepper beard nearly touching the eyepiece as he examined the sample Eliza had brought him. I've never seen cellular structures like this, he muttered, adjusting the focus. They're almost crystalline, but they're definitely degrading. He looked up at Eliza, who was pacing nervously. And you're certain about the source? Eliza glanced at the laboratory door for the 5th time in as many minutes. I told you, Dan. She appeared in my observatory 3 nights ago. I couldn't exactly bring her to a hospital. No, that would have been complicated. Daniel removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. But keeping an extraterrestrial being in your guest bedroom isn't exactly standard protocol either. What protocol exists for this situation? Eliza stopped pacing. Besides, she's weakening. This morning, her arm became transparent for almost a minute. Daniel leaned back in his chair, digesting the information. He and Eliza had been colleagues for 8 years, and he'd never known her to exaggerate or fabricate. If she claimed to be harboring an alien, he believed her. This bond she described, he said carefully. What exactly does it entail? I'm not entirely sure. She says it's deeper than marriage, a permanent merging of our frequencies, whatever that means. Eliza ran a hand through her disheveled hair. She tried to explain it in terms of quantum entanglement, but even with my background in astrophysics, I'm struggling to comprehend the implications. And you're considering it? Daniel asked, his expression neutral. I don't know, Eliza admitted. On one hand, it's insane. On the other. She trailed off, remembering how peaceful she felt in Lyra's presence, despite the strangeness of the situation. She's dying, Dan. And with her dies an entire civilization's knowledge. The scientific potential is staggering, Daniel acknowledged. But the personal cost to you. That's what I can't figure out, Eliza interrupted. Is this cosmic altruism, or am I being manipulated somehow? She says her people studied us for years before selecting compatible individuals. What if there's something she's not telling me? Daniel returned to the microscope. Based on these cellular structures, she's definitely not human. And they are degrading at an alarming rate. If her condition progresses linearly, I'd estimate she has less than 2 weeks before complete cellular collapse. Eliza's stomach tightened at the thought. Take me to her, Daniel said suddenly. As a biologist, I might be able to help, or at least verify her claims. Lyra sat in Eliza's living room, her translucent form wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth of the day. She looked up as Eliza and Daniel entered, her star-filled eyes widening slightly. You've brought someone, she observed, her melodic voice weaker than before. This is Professor Daniel Jackson, Eliza explained. He's a friend and a biologist. I thought he might be able to help. Lyra studied Daniel with interest. Your aura has a fascinating pattern, Professor. You've experienced great loss, yet maintained your capacity for wonder. That's rare. Daniel blinked, taken aback. His wife had died of cancer 5 years earlier, a fact not widely known at the university. You can see that? My people perceive emotional and experiential imprints, Lyra explained. It's how we identified potential matches. She turned to Eliza. Yours was extraordinarily compatible with mine, a perfect resonance. That's what I wanted to ask about, Eliza said, sitting beside Lyra. How exactly did you select me? Out of billions of humans? Lyra's form flickered momentarily before stabilizing. When we realized our world was doomed, we sent probes to neighboring star systems with suitable planets. These gathered data on various species, analyzing their developmental stage and compatibility potential. You've been observing Earth? Daniel asked, fascinated. For approximately 70 of your years, Lyra confirmed. We discovered your radio transmissions first, then developed more sophisticated monitoring capabilities. We were particularly interested in humans because your species' emotional capacity closely resembles our own. And the selection process? Eliza prompted. Our scientists developed algorithms to identify individuals whose quantum brainwave patterns matched those of our people. We call it soul affinity, though that translation is imperfect. Lyra's eyes dimmed momentarily. From millions of potential matches, we narrowed down to those most likely to accept a bond. Many of my kind have already found their matches on other worlds. So I'm not the only one. Eliza felt oddly disappointed. There were 17 potential matches for me on Earth, Lyra said. You were the optimal candidate because of your scientific background, your isolation from strong familial bonds, and your innate curiosity about the cosmos. She paused. And because your emotional pattern suggests capacity for adaptation to the unknown. Daniel raised an eyebrow at Eliza, who felt exposed by Lyra's assessment. It was accurate, painfully so. This bond, Daniel interjected. What exactly happens? Physically and metaphysically, I suppose? Lyra's expression became solemn. Our essences merge at the quantum level. My consciousness would exist alongside Eliza's, sharing her physical form while maintaining my distinct identity. We would share thoughts, memories, abilities. Like possession? Eliza asked, alarmed. No, Lyra assured her. More like partnership. You would remain yourself, but with access to my knowledge and perceptions. I would experience your world through your senses, but couldn't control your actions against your will. And what would happen to your physical form? Daniel asked. It would be absorbed into Eliza's during the bonding process. My biological matter would merge with hers at the cellular level, enhancing certain aspects of her physiology. Enhanced how? Eliza asked. Increased longevity, heightened sensory perception, improved cellular regeneration, Lyra listed. And abilities unique to my species, limited telepathic communication, energy manipulation, and the capacity to perceive quantum probabilities. Daniel whistled softly. That sounds advantageous. There are complications, Lyra admitted. The process is irreversible, and sometimes painful. And once bonded, we cannot be separated without the death of both beings. A heavy silence fell over the room. The enormity of the decision weighed on Eliza, not just saving a life, but permanently altering her own existence. I need to perform some tests, Daniel said finally. With your permission, Lyra. To verify what you've told us and perhaps find an alternative solution. You may examine me, Lyra agreed. But I fear your technology is insufficient to halt my deterioration. The bond is the only way. As Daniel began setting up his portable equipment, Eliza stepped onto her back porch, needing fresh air. The night sky stretched above her, the Pleiades barely visible through light pollution. Somewhere in that cluster, Lyra's world had died, sending her across unfathomable distances to this specific moment, this impossible choice. Inside, Daniel's voice rose in excitement as he discovered something in his examination. Eliza sighed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new complications. She needed to decide soon, for Lyra's sake, and perhaps for her own. For the first time in her life, the stars that had always provided comfort now seemed to be watching her, waiting for an answer she wasn't sure she could give. The government SUVs arrived just before dawn, their tires crunching on the gravel driveway outside Eliza's remote cottage. She was already awake, having spent another night watching Lyra's condition deteriorate. The alien being now spent most of her time in a semi-corporeal state, her form flickering in and out of visibility like a faulty hologram. They've found us, Eliza whispered, peering through the blinds at the vehicles. Men in dark suits emerged, led by a stern-looking woman whose posture screamed federal authority. Lyra's voice came weakly from the couch where she rested. Your people's detection technology is more advanced than we anticipated. It's probably the energy fluctuations Daniel detected, Eliza said, her mind racing. Stay hidden. I'll handle this. The knock at the door came with military precision, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the small house. Eliza smoothed her rumpled clothes, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Dr. Eliza Morgan? The woman asked, her voice clipped and professional. She held up a badge. Agent Rebecca Winters, National Security Agency. We need to speak with you regarding some unusual energy signatures detected from this location. I'm in the middle of a private research project, Eliza replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm not obligated to share preliminary findings with the NSA. Agent Winters smiled thinly. This isn't about academic freedom, Doctor. Our satellites detected radiation patterns consistent with non-terrestrial technology originating from your property. We have authorization to investigate potential threats to national security. Behind her, 4 agents waited, hands near concealed weapons. This wasn't a request. Fine, Eliza stepped aside. But I maintain all intellectual property rights to my research. That remains to be seen, Winters replied, entering the house with practiced efficiency. Her gaze swept the living room, pausing momentarily on the couch where Lyra had been moments before. Now there was only a rumpled blanket. Tell me about your research. Eliza launched into a detailed explanation of a fictional project involving quantum resonance patterns and their effect on atmospheric conditions. She threw in enough technical jargon to sound legitimate while watching the agents methodically inspecting her home. Fascinating, Winters said, clearly uninterested. And this research requires power consumption 3 times normal household levels and produces radiation signatures never before recorded on Earth? One of the agents approached with a handheld device that emitted soft beeping sounds. Ma'am, residual energy readings are strongest in this room, but there's a secondary source. He pointed toward the hallway leading to Eliza's bedroom. Eliza's heart sank. Lyra must have moved when she heard them coming. Dr. Morgan, Winters said, her tone hardening. We know you're concealing something. Cooperation now will be viewed favorably. Continued obstruction will have consequences. The moment stretched between them, taut with tension. Then a soft voice spoke from the hallway. She is protecting me. The fault is not hers. All heads turned as Lyra emerged, her form translucent and flickering badly. The agents reached for their weapons, but Winters held up a hand, her expression a mixture of shock and fascination. My God, she whispered. You're real. I am Lyra, the alien said, her voice weaker than ever. I came seeking asylum and assistance from Dr. Morgan. I pose no threat to your world. Secure the entity, Winters ordered, recovering quickly. 2 agents moved forward. Wait. Eliza stepped between them and Lyra. She's dying. Can't you see that? Her cellular structure is breaking down in our atmosphere. All the more reason to take her to a secure facility where she can receive proper care, Winters countered. Lyra's form flickered violently, almost disappearing completely before solidifying again. There is no care your science can provide. Only the bond can save me now. Bond? Winters looked sharply at Eliza. What is she talking about? Eliza hesitated, knowing that explaining would only complicate matters further. It's a biological process. Her species can adapt to our atmosphere through a symbiotic relationship with a compatible host. With you, Winters said, understanding dawning in her eyes. And you were considering this, without consulting your government? Without considering the national security implications? I was considering saving a life, Eliza shot back. Something your agency seems less concerned about. Winters' expression hardened. Dr. Morgan, you're being naive. This entity represents the first confirmed extraterrestrial contact in human history. The technological and scientific implications are staggering. This isn't a decision one person gets to make for an entire planet. It's my decision, Eliza insisted. She chose me specifically. And you believe that was random? Winters scoffed. An advanced alien species just happens to select a leading astrophysicist with high-level security clearance? The accusation hit Eliza like a physical blow. Had she been manipulated? Was Lyra's appearance at her observatory calculated for reasons beyond personal compatibility? Lyra seemed to sense her doubt. Eliza, she said softly. Your scientific knowledge was a factor in my selection, yes. But the resonance between us is genuine. I cannot bond with anyone else, even if I wished to. Convenient, Winters muttered. Dr. Morgan, we're taking both of you to a secure facility. This is now a matter of national security. You can't just, Eliza began, but her protest was cut short as two agents moved to restrain her. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, Eliza would struggle to recall the exact sequence. Lyra's form suddenly brightened, pulsing with blue-white energy that filled the room. The agents were thrown backward by an invisible force, their weapons clattering to the floor. Winters remained standing, shielding her eyes against the brilliant light. You will not harm her, Lyra's voice reverberated with newfound strength, though her form was now barely visible, stretched thin like smoke in wind. She is under my protection. The display of power lasted only seconds before Lyra collapsed, her form fading almost completely. Eliza rushed to her side, hands passing through Lyra's insubstantial body. Lyra! What have you done? Used the last of my energy, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Now I have hours, not days. Winters approached cautiously, the fallen agents regaining their footing behind her. Her expression had changed, there was fear there now, but also calculation. That display answers several questions, she said. And raises many more. She studied Eliza for a moment. You have until sundown to make your decision, Dr. Morgan. Either you both come willingly to our facility, or we'll return with specialized containment equipment. I'd prefer cooperation. And if I agree to the bond? Eliza asked, cradling the space where Lyra's head should be, feeling only the slightest tingle against her skin. Then we'll be dealing with a hybrid entity of unknown capabilities, Winters said frankly. That presents its own complications. After the agents departed, promising to maintain surveillance of the property, Eliza called Daniel in a panic. They're giving me until sundown, she explained after recounting the confrontation. What do I do, Dan? The scientific part of me wants to see what happens if you go with them, he admitted. The possibilities for research are unprecedented. And the human part? Eliza pressed. A long pause. Lyra chose you, Eliza. Not the government, not humanity as a collective. You. There must be a reason for that beyond your security clearance. Eliza looked at Lyra's now barely perceptible form. The starlights in her eyes had dimmed to pinpricks. I'm afraid, Eliza confessed. Not of the bond itself, but of losing myself. What if I become something else? Someone else? You've always defined yourself by your independence, Daniel observed. Maybe that's why this choice is so difficult, it's the ultimate commitment. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Eliza sat beside Lyra's fading form, wrestling with the most profound decision of her life. Outside, government vehicles idled at the perimeter of her property, waiting. Time was running out, and with it, Lyra's tenuous hold on existence in Earth's hostile atmosphere. Eliza looked at the alien being who had traveled across the stars to find her. In Lyra's eyes, she saw not just stars, but trust, hope, and something that might even be love, or whatever Lyra's species would call that emotion. For the first time in her life, Eliza Morgan, who had always preferred the company of distant stars to human connections, found herself contemplating a bond more profound than any she had ever imagined. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Decision time had arrived. Sunset painted Eliza's living room in amber hues as government vehicles mobilized outside. Through the window, she watched agents unloading equipment, sleek metal containers with hazard symbols and what appeared to be a portable containment unit. They're not taking any chances, she murmured. Lyra's form had deteriorated to little more than a shimmering outline, visible only when light struck at certain angles. Her voice came as a whisper, barely audible even in the quiet room. I'm sorry to have brought this upon you. Eliza turned from the window. Don't apologize. You were trying to survive. More than survive, Lyra corrected. To preserve what we were. Our history, our knowledge, our way of seeing the universe. Her form flickered, almost disappearing completely before materializing again. But I underestimated the cost to you. Daniel paced nearby, casting nervous glances toward the window. They'll be here in minutes, Eliza. Whatever you're going to do. I know, she interrupted, running a hand through her disheveled hair. The past week had aged her, worry etching new lines around her eyes. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, final courtesy notice. Agents will enter in 5 minutes. Cooperation is advised. Eliza stared at the message, then at Lyra's fading form, and finally at Daniel, who had stood by her through this impossible situation. What would you do? She asked him suddenly. Daniel stopped pacing. That's not fair, Eliza. This is your decision. I know, but I value your perspective. As a scientist and as my friend. He considered for a long moment. Scientifically speaking, the opportunity is unprecedented. The knowledge Lyra carries could advance our understanding by centuries. He hesitated. But as your friend, I worry about what you'll lose. Your autonomy. Your identity. I've spent my life studying the stars from a distance, Eliza said quietly. Always observing, never truly connecting. And now the stars have come to you, Daniel finished. Asking for the ultimate connection. Outside, car doors slammed. Footsteps approached. Lyra's voice came again, weaker than before. Eliza, there's something I must tell you. The bond, it's not just about preservation. My people, we seek these connections because we believe in a greater purpose. What purpose? Eliza asked, aware that time was slipping away. The universe trends toward entropy and isolation. But consciousness, when connected, creates a counterforce. Each bond strengthens the cosmic fabric. Lyra's form brightened momentarily with passion. We call it the Great Weaving. Billions of conscious bonds across the cosmos, creating a network of awareness that transcends individual lives. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her. Agent Winter's voice carried through, Dr. Morgan, we're entering now. Eliza's mind raced. The metaphysical implications of what Lyra described were staggering, either the ravings of a dying alien or a glimpse into cosmic truths beyond human comprehension. If we bond, she asked hurriedly, will I still be me? You will be you, but more, Lyra promised. As I will be me, but changed. Together, we become something new while preserving what we were. The door lock clicked as agents overrode it from outside. Eliza, Daniel warned, backing away as the door began to open. Time slowed for Eliza in that moment. She saw Agent Winters in the doorway, flanked by agents in specialized gear. She saw Daniel's expression, torn between scientific curiosity and concern for his friend. And she saw Lyra, or rather, the space where Lyra was fading away, taking with her the last vestiges of an entire civilization. Something crystallized within Eliza, a certainty that transcended logic and fear. She had spent her life searching the stars for answers, for connection to something greater than herself. Now that connection had found her, had chosen her specifically. No, she said firmly as the agents entered. You're not taking her. Dr. Morgan, Winters began, her tone reasonable but firm. This isn't a negotiation. The entity. Her name is Lyra, Eliza interrupted, stepping toward the shimmering outline that was barely visible now. And I've made my decision. Before anyone could react, Eliza reached out and placed her hands where Lyra's shoulders should be. Unlike previous times when her fingers had passed through, this time she felt resistance, a tingling energy that intensified rapidly. Eliza, don't. Daniel called out, moving forward only to be restrained by an agent. Secure them. Winters ordered, but it was too late. The moment Eliza committed to the bond, the room filled with blinding light. Lyra's form, nearly gone moments before, suddenly solidified and began to glow with increasing intensity. The light seemed to flow into Eliza through her outstretched hands, spreading through her body in luminous waves. The agents froze, weapons drawn but useless against the phenomenon unfolding before them. Daniel watched in horrified fascination as Eliza's body began to levitate slightly, surrounded by swirling energy. "What's happening?" Winters demanded, shielding her eyes against the brilliance. Daniel could only shake his head, speechless as scientific curiosity warred with fear for his friend. Inside the cocoon of light, Eliza experienced 1,000 sensations simultaneously. Lyra's consciousness flowed into hers like water filling empty spaces she hadn't known existed. Memories not her own cascaded through her mind, crystal cities beneath twin moons, beings of light communicating through thought, the agonizing decision to leave a dying world. With the memories came knowledge, mathematics beyond Earth's most advanced theories, physics that unified forces humans had yet to discover, biology that treated entire ecosystems as single organisms. The information threatened to overwhelm her, but somehow her mind expanded to accommodate it. Physically, the transformation was equally profound. Eliza felt her cells restructuring, becoming both more stable and more fluid. Her senses sharpened dramatically. Suddenly she could perceive the electromagnetic fields generated by the electronic equipment, could see the infrared signatures of the agents' bodies, could feel the quantum probabilities shifting around her. Through it all, she remained Eliza, her memories, her personality, her essence intact but now existing alongside Lyra's consciousness. They were separate and yet unified, two melodies intertwining to create a harmony greater than either alone. When the light finally faded, Eliza stood transformed. Her appearance remained mostly human, but her skin now held a subtle opalescence, and her eyes, when she opened them, contained pinpoints of light like distant stars against darkness. The room had fallen silent. The agents stood frozen, weapons still drawn but uncertainty evident in their postures. Daniel stared in wonder and apprehension. Agent Winters was the first to speak. "Dar. Morgan?" "Yes," Eliza replied, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate in the air. "And also Lyra. We are both, and we are more." She looked at her hands, marveling at the subtle glow beneath her skin. "The bond is complete." "Secure the subject," Winters ordered, though her voice lacked conviction. Two agents moved forward cautiously. Eliza raised a hand, and they stopped, not from any physical force, but from a sudden, inexplicable certainty that they should not approach. "That would be unwise," Eliza said gently. "We mean no harm, but we will not be contained." Winter's expression hardened. "You don't have a choice, Dr. Morgan, or whatever you are now. National security protocols are clear." "Perhaps," Eliza acknowledged. "But your protocols didn't anticipate this situation." She turned to Daniel, who still watched with scientific fascination. "It's remarkable, Dan. I can perceive quantum states directly, see the probability waves collapse with each decision made." "Are you, still you?" he asked hesitantly. Eliza smiled, and in that smile Daniel recognized his friend. "Yes. Different, but still me. Lyra's consciousness exists alongside mine, guiding, sharing, but not controlling." "That's enough," Winters interrupted. "We're leaving now. All of us." Eliza turned back to the agent. "I understand your concerns. Truly, I do. But containing us would be a mistake, and not just because it might prove impossible." She stepped forward, and the agents involuntarily backed away. What Lyra's people offer humanity is greater than technology or scientific knowledge. It's a new understanding of consciousness itself, a glimpse of how minds can connect across the cosmos. "That's not your decision to make," Winters insisted. "No," Eliza agreed. But it is mine to demonstrate. She looked around the room at the tense agents. I will cooperate with your studies, within limits. I will share knowledge that benefits humanity, within ethical boundaries. But I will not be imprisoned or treated as a specimen. The standoff stretched into uncomfortable silence, the balance of power shifting visibly as Winters considered her limited options. Finally, she lowered her hand, and the agents reluctantly lowered their weapons. This isn't over, Winters warned. Higher authorities will need to be consulted. Of course, Eliza replied serenely. Meanwhile, I believe Daniel has some questions for us, as does the scientific community he represents. She looked at her friend with newfound depth in her star-filled eyes. Shall we begin? As night fell completely outside, illuminating the real stars that had guided Eliza's life, she felt a profound sense of rightness despite the uncertainties ahead. For the first time, she was not merely observing the cosmos, she had become part of its greater pattern, a thread in what Lyra called the Great Weaving. Whatever came next, she would face it not alone, but as something new, a bridge between worlds, carrying within her the legacy of a distant star. 6 months had passed since the night of the bonding. The small conference room at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory hummed with anticipation as scientists, government officials, and military personnel waited for the day's demonstration to begin. At the center of attention was Eliza Morgan, or rather, the being she had become. "Are we ready to proceed, Dr. Morgan?" asked Dr. Harrington, the newly appointed liaison between Eliza and the various government agencies monitoring her case. Eliza nodded, her movements more fluid than purely human. The subtle luminescence beneath her skin had become more pronounced over the months, especially when she was focused or emotional. Her eyes, containing what appeared to be actual stars in their depths, scanned the room. Today's demonstration concerns interstellar navigation techniques, she announced, her voice carrying those musical undertones that still made some listeners uncomfortable. Specifically, how to plot safe corridors through quantum instabilities in spacetime. Daniel Jackson sat in the front row, as he had for every demonstration since the bonding. His role had evolved from concerned friend to primary scientific interpreter, helping translate the advanced concepts Eliza shared into frameworks other scientists could understand. "Eliza," he said quietly as she prepared her materials, "how are you feeling today?" She smiled, knowing the question went deeper than casual concern. "The integration continues to stabilize. The episodes of dissociation have decreased significantly." The first months after the bonding had been difficult, periods when Eliza's consciousness would fragment, when the delineation between herself and Lyra would blur dangerously. There had been times when she'd spoken languages never heard on Earth, when her perceptions had become so alien that she lost touch with her human senses entirely. Agent Winters, seated at the back of the room, watched with the same wariness she'd maintained since the beginning. Despite months of observation and testing, she remained convinced that Eliza/Lyra represented a potential threat, or at least an unknown variable too significant to leave unmonitored. "Before we begin," Eliza said, addressing the room, "I'd like to make an announcement." She paused, making eye contact with Daniel, who gave an encouraging nod. "I've detected signals from other bonded pairs." The room erupted in murmurs. Harrington leaned forward. "You mean other aliens who found human hosts?" "Yes," Eliza confirmed. 7 distinct signals, from various locations around the globe. The bonds occurred within weeks of mine, but these pairs have remained in hiding, observing how humanity has responded to me. Winters stood immediately. "Locations. We need locations." "That's not why I'm sharing this information," Eliza replied calmly. "I'm telling you because it's time for the next phase. The great weaving that Lyra spoke of, it requires connection between bonded pairs." "You've been in communication with these others?" Harrington asked, looking troubled. "Only recently, and only in the most basic sense. Like sensing their presence rather than having a conversation." Eliza's expression grew distant. But there's potential for much more. If we could establish a network. Absolutely not, Winters interrupted. The security implications are unacceptable. We barely understand your capabilities, let alone what a network of your kind could do. Daniel intervened. Perhaps we should hear what such a network might accomplish before dismissing it. Eliza nodded gratefully. Lyra's people believe that consciousness, when connected across vast distances, creates a counterforce to entropy. A way of preserving information, experience, even physical reality itself against the universe's tendency toward decay. That sounds metaphysical rather than scientific, one of the physicists observed. The distinction is less clear than you might think, Eliza replied. Consider how observation affects quantum states, consciousness itself interacting with physical reality. She projected a complex mathematical equation onto the screen behind her. This describes the theoretical framework for what we call the conscious lattice, a network of connected minds spanning interstellar distances. The equation was beyond even the most advanced mathematics Earth had developed. Several scientists began furiously taking notes, while others simply stared in confusion. What would this network actually do? Harrington pressed. Eliza considered how to explain concepts that had no direct parallel in human experience. At its most basic level, it would allow instantaneous communication across any distance. More profoundly, it would create a repository of knowledge and experience that transcends individual mortality, a collective consciousness that preserves what would otherwise be lost. Like a living library, Daniel suggested. Yes, but also more. Eliza's eyes brightened with enthusiasm. Imagine being able to directly share experiences, to learn not by description but by temporarily accessing another's perceptions. Imagine collaborative problem-solving where minds can truly work as one when needed, then return to individual experience. Sounds like the end of human individuality to me, Winters said darkly. A hive mind. No, Eliza corrected firmly. The bond between Lyra and me hasn't erased either of our individualities, it's enhanced them through contrast and complementarity. The lattice would function similarly but on a larger scale. She moved to the center of the room, and the air around her began to shimmer slightly, a visual manifestation of the energy she now controlled. I've respected the boundaries imposed since the bonding, she said, her voice taking on new harmonics. I've submitted to tests, shared knowledge carefully, and demonstrated goodwill. But the time for caution alone has passed. Earth now hosts several bonded pairs, with more likely to arrive in coming years. We can approach this reality with fear and restriction. Or with exploration and growth, Daniel finished. Eliza nodded. The choice will shape humanity's future among the stars. Winters started to object, but Harrington silenced her with a gesture. What exactly are you proposing, Dr. Morgan? A meeting, Eliza said simply. A gathering of all bonded pairs to establish the first node of the lattice. With observers present, she added, seeing Winters' expression. Full transparency. The room descended into heated discussion. Some scientists argued passionately for proceeding, citing the unprecedented opportunity. Security personnel raised alarming scenarios of alien influence and control. Through it all, Eliza waited patiently, her star-filled eyes observing the human drama with a perspective both intimate and distant. 3 weeks later, Eliza stood on the summit of Mauna Kea in Hawaii, the astronomical observatories gleaming in the moonlight around her. The location had been chosen for its symbolic significance, a place where humans had long studied the stars, now hosting those who had come from them. Daniel stood nearby, official observer for the scientific community. Agent Winters and her team maintained a perimeter, weapons ready despite repeated assurances they wouldn't be needed. They're coming, Eliza said suddenly, turning toward the east. One by one, they arrived, 7 pairs, each showing the same subtle signs of bonding that Eliza displayed. Their human components varied widely: a young Indian woman who had been a quantum physicist, an elderly Brazilian man who had once been a spiritual leader, a Canadian teenager who had been a musical prodigy, and others equally diverse. No words were exchanged at first, only knowing glances as they formed a circle under the vast canopy of stars. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, they joined hands. What happened next was invisible to the observers but profound for the participants. Consciousness expanded beyond individual bounds, flowing between the bonded pairs like water finding its level. Memories, knowledge, and perceptions merged temporarily into a collective awareness that encompassed both human and alien experiences. In that shared consciousness, Eliza/Lyra perceived the true scope of the Great Weaving for the first time, not merely a network of the bonded pairs on Earth, but connections stretching across galaxies, thousands of species joined in similar partnerships over millennia, preserving wisdom that would otherwise be lost to cosmic cataclysms. When they finally separated, hours had passed, though it had seemed like moments. The observers watched in wonder and apprehension as the bonded pairs turned toward them with new purpose in their otherworldly eyes. Eliza stepped forward as spokesperson. "The first node is established," she announced, her voice somehow both hers and not hers. "Earth is now connected to the lattice." "What does that mean in practical terms?" Daniel asked. "It means humanity has taken its first true step into a larger community," she replied. "The knowledge shared through the lattice will transform your understanding of the cosmos, of consciousness itself." "And what do the aliens get from this arrangement?" Winters demanded, ever suspicious. "Continuation," Eliza said simply. Without the bond, Lyra's people would have vanished when their star died. Instead, they continue, changed, evolved, but preserved. The lattice ensures that no sentient species truly disappears, that wisdom hard-won is never entirely lost. She looked up at the night sky, her expression distant yet intimate. "There's something I need to show you," she said, raising her hands. The air above the observatory shimmered, then transformed into a vast projection of space unlike any telescope image. It showed not just stars and galaxies but flowing currents of energy connecting certain systems, the lattice made visible. "Each point of light represents a bonded world," Eliza explained. "Earth is now among them, small but significant. A new thread in the cosmic tapestry." The observers stood transfixed by the scale of what they were seeing. Even Winters seemed momentarily humbled by the vastness of the network. "This is just the beginning," Eliza continued. "As more bonds form on Earth, always voluntary, always between true resonant matches, humanity's connection to the lattice will strengthen. You'll gain access to knowledge accumulated over billions of years by thousands of civilizations." "And in return?" Daniel asked softly. Eliza smiled, and in that expression was both Lyra's alien wisdom and her own human warmth. "You contribute your unique perspective. Every species perceives reality differently, that diversity of consciousness is what makes the lattice so powerful." As dawn approached, the bonded pairs dispersed, returning to their lives across the globe, some to scientific institutions where they shared knowledge, others to quieter existences where they explored the subtleties of their transformed consciousness. Eliza and Daniel remained on the mountain, watching the first light touch the observatories that had once been her professional home. "Are you happy, Eliza?" he asked finally, the question he'd wanted to ask for months. She considered this. "I'm more than I was," she said carefully. "There are moments when I miss the simplicity of being only human, when the vastness of what I now perceive feels overwhelming." She turned to him, starlight glimmering in her eyes. "But I've never felt more connected, to the cosmos, to other beings, to possibilities I never imagined. So yes, I believe I am happy, though the word seems inadequate." "And Lyra?" "She is fulfilled. Her purpose accomplished, her people's legacy secured." Eliza's expression softened. "We are still learning each other, still negotiating the boundaries of our shared existence. It's not always harmonious, but it is always meaningful. Below them, Winters and her team prepared to depart, their monitoring equipment packed away. The threat they had feared hadn't materialized, though their vigilance would continue. Human institutions adapted slowly to cosmic revelations. What happens next? Daniel asked, watching the sun climb above the horizon. Eliza's gaze turned inward, accessing knowledge beyond human experience. Integration. Education. Preparation. She looked at her friend with newfound depth. Humanity stands at a threshold, Daniel. The stars are no longer distant objects to be studied, they're neighbors, partners, fellow travelers in the great cosmic journey. Together they watched the new day dawn on a world forever changed, not by invasion or conquest, but by connection across the void. The choice Eliza had made in that moment of crisis had rippled outward, transforming not just her life but the trajectory of human evolution itself. Somewhere in the depths of their shared consciousness, Lyra's essence resonated with satisfaction. The great weaving continued, strengthened by new threads, preserving the light of consciousness against the darkness between stars. And Eliza Morgan, once a solitary observer of distant galaxies, had become a bridge between worlds, her decision to accept rather than fear the unknown opening doors that would never again be closed. As the observatories gleamed in the morning light, their telescopes still pointed at stars whose secrets were now being revealed through channels their designers had never imagined. Eliza felt a profound sense of rightness. The universe was vaster and stranger and more wonderful than humanity had ever suspected, and she was now both guide and explorer in the cosmic journey ahead. The transformation was complete. The next chapter was just beginning.